Do you remember Braveheart in 1995? The film moved the world with its fearless warriors, but the real lives of its actors were far more tragic than anything shown on screen. Behind the glory were dangerous illnesses, broken marriages, and sudden deaths that were kept quiet for years. Now, we uncover their true stories and honor the legacies they left behind. Patrick McGoohan as King Edward I, Longshanks. Patrick McGoohan was born on March 19, 1928, in New York City. At 66 years old, he played King Edward I, Longshanks, the ruthless strategist whose cruelty set the emotional core of Braveheart, 1995. The icy authority he brought to the role didn't come from imagination. It came from decades of choosing isolation over compromise. What forged that defiant intensity was a career built almost entirely on conflict. After turning down the James Bond franchise twice, McGoohan became known as the actor who refused superstardom if it meant surrendering control. The decision followed him like a ghost. Studios saw him as brilliant but volatile because he would walk away from million-dollar deals if they violated his personal code. Even The Prisoner, the groundbreaking series he created and controlled, became a battlefield of lawsuits, network interference, and psychological exhaustion that left him emotionally frayed. His performances grew sharper, almost dangerous, because they were drawn from real frustration, and the turmoil seeped into his private life with equal force. His marriage to Joan Drummond survived only because she learned to live inside the storm. Sudden relocations, months of unpaid work, and McGoohan's near-obsessive rule that he would never kiss another actress on screen. That strictness made him respected but incredibly hard to work with. By the late 1990s, subtle signs of a neurological illness appeared. Trembling hands, slowed movement, moments of disorientation during long shoots. Instead of admitting vulnerability, he retreated into voice acting, using animation and narration to hide what his body was beginning to betray. Once that withdrawal started, it became almost total. He stopped attending premieres, refused interviews, and vanished from the public eye as though severing each tie deliberately. He'd disappear for months without returning calls, living quietly in Pacific Palisades with only a handful of trusted collaborators. He accepted roles only when he believed he could finish them without exposing his decline. Patrick McGoohan died on January 13, 2009, at age 80 in Santa Monica, after years of quietly managing his illness. His estate, roughly $10 million in royalties from The Prisoner, long-running television residuals, and contracts he negotiated fiercely throughout his career, passed to Joan and their daughters. Shaun Lawlor as Malcolm Wallace. Shaun Lawlor was born on January 25, 1954, in Dublin, Ireland. At 40 years old, he played Malcolm Wallace, the father whose death ignites William Wallace's rebellion, in Braveheart, 1995. His brief appearance carried the weight of a man who understood loss well. The momentum from In the Name of the Father and Titanic should have pushed his career forward, yet the industry pulled him sideways instead. Casting trends heavily favored English actors, leaving Lawlor to secure only scattered film roles while returning to the stage for steady income. Even after winning the Irish Theatre Award in 1997, he found himself fighting for visibility in an environment that rarely rewarded his consistency. That instability followed him home. His first marriage to Mary Lawlor collapsed during a period of severe alcoholism, costing him roles and credibility. After years of rebuilding, his second marriage to producer Anne Mulhall also broke apart, worn down by travel, financial strain, and the emotional residue of his earlier battles. The cracks in his personal life deepened just as his health began to fail. And when lung cancer arrived, it altered everything. He continued to accept small projects, but treatment reduced his physical capacity and forced repeated withdrawals from commitments he had hoped would mark a return. By the final year of his life, his circle narrowed to Dublin hospitals and short periods of work whenever symptoms allowed. Acting remained his last structure, even as the disease dismantled the rest. Shaun Lawlor died on October 10, 2009, at age 55 in Dublin. His estate, valued at about $2 million, primarily small residential properties acquired over decades of theater work, became the sum of a career built on survival rather than opportunity. Ian Bannon as Robert the Elder, the leper. Ian Bannon was born on June 29, 1928, in Airdrie, Scotland. At 66 years old, he played Robert the Elder, the diseased, disillusioned father who shapes Robert the Bruce's moral downfall, in Braveheart, 1995. It was a role that mirrored the fractures already present in his own life. He carried a reputation as a titan of stage and film, yet his career repeatedly collided with choices that cost him dearly. His Oscar-nominated performance in The Flight of the Phoenix positioned him for major Hollywood offers, but rejecting roles he found cheap led to years of unemployment and a near collapse of his finances in the 1970s. That crisis reshaped his path, pushing him back to theater while he fought chronic pain from an old wartime injury that never fully healed. His first marriage crumbled under the pressure of constant travel between London and New York, leaving scars he rarely discussed. A second marriage to Marilyn Salisbury in 1970 brought steadiness, but their life together was marked by repeated disruptions from his career swings and his private battles with severe depression, which required hospitalization on 2 separate occasions. Those years left him oscillating between acclaimed performances and periods of withdrawal from the spotlight. By the late 1990s, his work was finally resurging. Waking Ned Devine earned him global praise, and for the first time in decades, he appeared poised for a late career renaissance. But only weeks after filming ended, tragedy struck. While traveling with Marilyn near Loch Ness, their car overturned on Knockey Strait, leaving her injured and him trapped in a fatal position he could not survive. Ian Bannon died on November 3, 1999, at age 71. His estate, valued at around $5 million from decades of theater and film work, passed to Marilyn, who lived another 20 years after the accident. His final role in Braveheart, portraying a father corrupted by fear and illness, now feels like an eerie echo of the vulnerability he carried but rarely showed. Mike Mitchell as Soldier in Battlefield. Mike Mitchell was born on April 28, 1956, in Aberdeen, Scotland. At 38 years old, he appeared in Braveheart, 1995, as a battlefield soldier, a brief moment that marked his first real entry into acting. His physical presence came from a life built on extremes. Before the cameras, his world belonged to muscle, competition, and survival. He won multiple Mr. Universe and Masters World titles, but the cost was heavy. A catastrophic construction accident in 1980 left him with lasting injuries and an addiction to pain medication that shadowed him for years. The shift from bodybuilding to acting came late, and for every role he won in Gladiator or Spartacus, he lost others for being too overpowering for the screen. His personal life fractured under that pressure. His first marriage ended in 1990, after years of constant training and travel pulled him away from home. A second marriage to actress Denise Mitchell later fell apart in 2015 when he chose to relocate permanently to Turkey, seeking a quieter life and lower living costs after heart complications slowed his athletic career. Those changes left him rebuilding stability again through small film roles and running a modest B&B. As he aged, the cumulative wear on his body grew impossible to ignore. Chronic knee damage from competition hindered his mobility, and bouts of depression pushed him further into isolation. Yet he continued accepting international film jobs, sometimes working across Turkey, Italy, and Scotland in the same year, a pace he maintained even as underlying heart issues became more difficult to manage. Mike Mitchell died on July 23, 2021, at age 65, from a sudden heart attack aboard his boat in Fethiye, Turkey. His estate, roughly $3 million in property, business holdings, and residual contracts, was left to his family. His small appearance in Braveheart stands as the quiet beginning of a second career that rose out of pain, discipline, and a life lived far harder than the screen ever revealed. Malcolm Tierney as magistrate. Malcolm Tierney was born on February 25, 1938, in Isleworth, England. At 56 years old, he played the magistrate in Braveheart, 1995. The cold, unyielding sheriff whose brutality becomes the spark for Wallace's rebellion. The part was brief, but its severity mirrored many of the internal battles Malcolm had been fighting long before cameras ever rolled. His career stretched across more than 100 roles, yet it was rarely a smooth ascent. In theater, he earned early acclaim with an Olivier Award in 1965 for The Recruiting Officer, but television soon typecast him into an endless stream of antagonists. That image trapped him. Hollywood wanted him to play cruel men, and he refused, believing it would destroy the emotional balance he'd worked hard to rebuild. The decision cost him financially, and in the 1990s he came dangerously close to bankruptcy as his gambling addiction escalated, swallowing much of what he earned from the Bill and Coronation Street. The turbulence seeped deeply into his personal life. His first marriage, to a fellow actress, collapsed in 1975 after a bitter custody dispute that left wounds he carried for decades. His second marriage to Austrian artist Andrea Schinko brought stability, but his need to climb back professionally often clashed with the responsibilities waiting at home. On top of that, years of heavy drinking left him battling chronic liver disease, a condition he managed quietly while still performing with the Royal Shakespeare Company. By 2013, exhaustion began to show. Roles grew fewer, rehearsals drained him, and recurring hospital visits forced him to confront a reality he had tried to ignore. When doctors finally diagnosed pancreatic cancer, it had already advanced beyond treatment. Malcolm faced his decline with a kind of stillness. No dramatic farewells, only quiet hours in a Maida Vale hospital room, where he tried to put unfinished matters in order while his body failed more quickly than he expected. Malcolm Tierney died on November 2, 2014, at age 76. His estate, valued at around $1.5 million, built through decades of television work, stage contracts, and royalties, passed to his wife Andrea and their daughters Elsa and Anna. His portrayal of the magistrate, a man convinced he was dispensing justice while blind to the suffering he caused, now feels hauntingly close to Malcolm's own lifelong struggle to reconcile ambition, addiction, love, and regret. Martin Dempsey as Old Scottish Man. Martin Dempsey was born on January 1, 1922, in Fermoy, Ireland. At 72 years old, he appeared in Braveheart, 1995, as the Old Scottish Man, a quiet figure meant to embody the endurance of ordinary lives caught in extraordinary times. For Martin, who had weathered decades of hardship, the role felt less like acting and more like stepping briefly into the light after a lifetime spent in the background. His entrance into the arts was late, almost accidental. After losing his mother to tuberculosis during childhood, he worked in factories from age 14, leaving no room for artistic ambitions. Only in his 40s did he find local theater, discovering a fragile but genuine talent that earned him small roles in productions like Ulysses, 1967, and The Devil in the Fog, 1968. Despite these achievements, his financial situation remained precarious. Acting paid too little, too rarely, and he supported himself through repair jobs, long shifts, and odd work across Cork, a routine that left him perpetually balancing passion and survival. His personal life carried a different kind of endurance. His marriage to a schoolteacher lasted 4 decades until she died of breast cancer in 1985, a loss that broke him in ways he rarely discussed. Left alone to raise a grandchild, he withdrew from most acting opportunities, taking the stage or camera only when money forced him to. Meanwhile, arthritis spread aggressively through his joints, slowing his movements and making each rehearsal and performance more physically taxing than the last. As he entered his 70s, isolation deepened. He lived quietly in a modest home in Cork, dependent on a small pension and the occasional acting call, though these grew scarce as illness advanced. Heart complications became more frequent, yet he resisted hospitalization, choosing instead to manage his pain with the same stoic resolve that had carried him through most of his life. His death in 1999, sudden from heart failure, was discovered only later by family members who hadn't been able to reach him. Martin Dempsey died at age 77, leaving behind an estate of roughly $500,000 accumulated through pensions and careful savings. His brief appearance in Braveheart now feels symbolic. One quiet moment on screen that honored a lifetime marked not by drama, but by perseverance, grief, and the kind of strength that rarely makes headlines, but defines the people history is built on. Mel Gibson as William Wallace. Mel Gibson was born on January 3, 1956, in Peekskill, New York. At 38 years old, he played William Wallace, the fearless rebel whose rage reshaped a nation, in Braveheart, 1995. It became the role that crowned him a Hollywood icon and simultaneously exposed the deepest fractures in his own life. But long before awards and headlines, Gibson was already carrying storms he couldn't control. Years of alcoholism, pressure from early fame, and a childhood shaped by strict Catholic discipline slowly hardened into something volatile. The triumph of Braveheart, 2 Oscars, global acclaim, only made the fall sharper when the 2006 DUI arrest and anti-Semitic outburst erupted. Deals collapsed, studios cut ties, and his 26-year marriage to Robin Moore unraveled under the combined weight of addiction and betrayal. The scandal with Oksana Grigorieva and accusations of domestic violence dragged him deeper, turning Hollywood's golden hero into its most radioactive name. When the noise faded, Gibson faced consequences that felt almost biblical. His divorce settlement, over $400 million, became the costliest in Hollywood history. The custody battle for his daughter Lucia dragged on for years, staining every attempt at rebuilding. In 2022, he underwent heart surgery, a reminder that decades of stress and self-destruction had seeped into his body as much as his career. And yet, in the ruins, films like Hacksaw Ridge proved he could still direct with the same fire that once defined him. By the early 2020s, the world had not forgotten his sins, but it had begun to remember his talent. Quietly living between Malibu, Costa Rica, and his private island in Fiji, Gibson rebuilt his reputation one disciplined step at a time, fathering his 9th child with Rosalind Ross, returning to directing and producing films that no longer sought redemption, only truth. The man who once screamed for freedom on screen now fought for something smaller, but harder: stability. In 2025, Mel Gibson is 69 years old, still directing, still acting, and still walking the tightrope between legend and controversy. His net worth, estimated at $1.25 billion, comes from Icon Productions, worldwide royalties, and vast real estate holdings. His journey has become its own kind of epic, not the rise of William Wallace, but the lifelong battle of a man trying to outlive the worst version of himself. Brendan Gleeson as Hamish Campbell. Brendan Gleeson was born on March 29, 1955 in Dublin. At 39 years old, he played Hamish Campbell, the loyal friend whose steadiness anchors Wallace's fury, in Braveheart, 1995. It was his gateway into Hollywood, the moment his quiet Irish intensity finally found a global stage. Before that breakthrough, Gleeson had lived a very different life. He spent years teaching Irish and English in Dublin, performing on small stages at night, barely earning enough to justify the dream. That late start came with cost: audition rejections, long periods without work, and the pressure of supporting a young family before the world ever learned his name. Even as roles in Michael Collins and The General brought praise, Gleeson quietly battled stage anxiety, the kind that tightens the lungs, the kind few expect from a man with such commanding presence. Yet behind every achievement was a sacrifice his marriage to Mary Weldon endured in silence. The long shoots abroad, the sudden fame after Harry Potter, the award season grind during In Bruges and the Banshees of Inisherin, all forced him to choose between career momentum and the family he adored. Raising 4 sons, 2 of whom later became actors, meant learning to be present even while the industry constantly pulled him away. It was the tension he admitted privately. Success demanded distance, but fatherhood required the opposite. As the years passed, Gleeson's struggles shifted inward. He used his influence to support mental health campaigns in Ireland, openly acknowledging the anxiety he once hid. Fame never hardened him. Instead, it made him reflective, even wary of the cost that ambition extracts. Through it all, the loyalty Hamish showed in Braveheart mirrored his own devotion to the life he fought to protect off-screen. In 2025, Brendan Gleeson is 70 years old, choosing roles carefully while mentoring younger actors, including his sons Domhnall and Brian. His net worth, around $20 million, is the quiet result of decades of steady work and a career built on craft rather than spectacle. He remains, much like Hamish, the rare figure whose strength is not in shouting, but in staying. Angus Macfadyen as Robert the Bruce. Angus Macfadyen was born on September 21, 1963, in Glasgow, Scotland. At 31 years old, he played Robert the Bruce, the conflicted heir torn between cowardice and courage, in Braveheart, 1995. The role marked him forever, both as a rising talent and as a man wrestling with his own identity. That breakthrough came after a childhood spent moving between the Philippines, Africa, Singapore, and France, a nomadic life that left him feeling rootless and often bullied. After Braveheart, Hollywood suddenly expected him to be a permanent medieval icon, and that typecasting became a trap he couldn't escape. Even with powerful roles in Cradle Will Rock, Titus, and later Equilibrium, studios pigeonholed him, and the momentum he earned vanished almost as quickly as it arrived. His first marriage collapsed under the pressure, leaving emotional shockwaves that he carried quietly while trying to rebuild a career no longer shaped by expectation, but by survival. As offers dwindled, he shifted into the world of independent cinema, a space full of freedom, but also financial uncertainty. He coped by writing scripts late into the night, chasing characters who felt as lost as he once did. That writing habit fed into a caffeine addiction so severe it caused years of chronic insomnia, the kind that distorts judgment and drains the spirit. And yet, roles like Jeff Denlon in Saw 3 and his chilling turn in Turn, Washington's Spies proved he still possessed a rare intensity that never faded, even when the industry stopped looking. His personal life eventually steadied when he married a close friend of Catherine Zeta-Jones, building a quiet home for their child far from the brutal cycles of Los Angeles. That stability gave him the courage to return to the shadow of Robert the Bruce in 2019, co-writing and starring in Robert the Bruce, a film that felt more like a confession than a performance, a story about second chances, written by a man who desperately needed one. In 2025, Angus Macfadyen is 62 years old, working mostly in television and independent films while advocating for Scottish arts. His net worth, around $4 million, reflects decades of unpredictable roles, personal reinvention, and a career rebuilt not through fame but through persistence. For many fans, he remains the most human face of Braveheart, a man who learned, like the Bruce himself, that courage sometimes arrives late but still arrives in time. James Cosmo as Campbell. James Cosmo was born on May 24, 1948, in Clydebank, Scotland. At 47 years old, he played Campbell, the grizzled warrior whose loyalty bleeds into every battle, in Braveheart, 1995. His presence gave the film its quiet backbone, shaped from a life far harsher than the audiences ever knew. Before cinema embraced him, Cosmo lived a reality steeped in conflict. He served in the Scottish forces during the late 1960s, witnessing violence in Northern Ireland that left him with mild PTSD that he carried silently into adulthood. When he left the military, he worked as a welder, scraping together rent while auditioning across London and enduring more rejections than roles. That pressure destroyed his first marriage, leaving him unsure whether acting was ambition or punishment. But films like Highlander and Trainspotting eventually proved he hadn't suffered for nothing. His breakthrough in middle age brought its own complications. Balancing success with healing from trauma required a kind of emotional stamina few understood. He fought through long years of physical strain, the demands of action-heavy roles, and the exhaustion of constantly proving his worth in an industry that prefers youth. In 2010, a skin cancer diagnosis forced him to confront his own fragility, a battle he won but not without scars. Yet even in the hardest years, his deep, thunderous voice and unwavering discipline kept him a favorite of directors searching for authenticity. His second marriage restored the stability that fame could not provide. With Annie Harris, he raised 6 children in a home built on routine rather than red carpets. That grounded life allowed him to take on roles like Jeor Mormont in Game of Thrones, where audiences saw a version of Cosmo shaped by every hardship he had endured. Stern, loyal, bruised, and deeply human. In 2025, James Cosmo is 78 years old, still acting selectively while supporting charities focused on childhood safety and veterans. His net worth, around $8 million, reflects decades of television consistency and late-career global visibility. Like Campbell, he survived war, illness, heartbreak, and reinvention, proving that strength is not in the battles won, but in the endurance to keep standing. Some lives burned bright, others faded quietly, but each of them left a mark no battle could erase. Their stories remind us that behind the glory of Braveheart, real people carried real pain, real struggles, and real endings that few ever knew. Which of these actors' journeys shocked you the most, and whose legacy stays with you even now? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more untold stories behind cinema's most unforgettable legends.